About what?
About your investment plans. What should we do?
What should you guys do?
We're thinking that you're an investment advisor now, and you could give us poor guys some advice now that you've hit the big time.
All right, let's see here. 1 second. I'm just loading a page for you guys. All right, so the advice I give you is Matthew chapter 25.
How much of it?
Just the where it talks about how the talents, the 5, the 10, the 2 talents, and how basically each person. No, it was 1, 2, and 5, I believe, and the one who had only 1 talent didn't want to invest it. He just wanted to keep it safe.
Hide it in a napkin? Is that the one?
Something like that,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
And then all the other ones, they made money on their investment. And so the moral of the story is that if you don't do investments, then you will not be saved. So you better start doing investments.
All right. So I've been saving money. It's an account,
You will
online
not, you will
account.
not be financially saved, that is, I should clarify.
So how do we know what to pick on Robinhood Snacks? That's what I
Uh,
can't figure out. Do
you
you
just have
pick the
to,
ones they suggest, or what do you do?
well, there's different strategies. And so, I have a lot of experience over time just figuring things out on my own. And it helps to actually lose money sometimes because you learn the hard way. So, but the different strategies, it just depends what type of way you want to go about it. But I mean, I see you're recording this. Do you really want this to be recorded?
Sure. Unless you don't want it to be recorded.
I
Not.
don't mind, but like for example, if you have if we talk about any specifics of your accounts or anything.
Oh, I'm just thinking about you get certain ones there that they think are good picks, and if you don't know anything about this, then you just pick those. I mean, you're
Um,
not giving us too much here.
because there's just so much, but basically one of my strategies that I do is, this might sound a little bit silly, but one of the strategies I currently do is I look. Robinhood has a list of stocks that performed the best today and stocks that performed the worst today. This is best and worst on Robinhood, not in
Yeah.
the entire stock market, because there are many other stocks that Robinhood you can't trade on. So, but I look at that list and I actually buy the ones that are the biggest losers. If it's at least 30% loss, I'll buy one share of them. And I actually did this a couple like about a day or two ago. I bought one share of this one. It had dropped from about $47 a share down to $26 a share. So I bought one share. Then it went a little bit up to like about $29 a share.
You sold it.
Sold and then rebought it at the same price. That's another strategy I do: selling it and buying it at the same price. Um, and so then, guess what happened? It starts tanking again, but I only have one share, so it doesn't actually matter too much if it goes down because you can easily recover. So, uh, my currently my rule, depending on what type of stocks it is, for volatile stocks, like stocks that move a lot in value, if it drops 10% in value, buy more.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the lesser stocks that don't move as much, you could do it when it drops like 5%. But basically, this one share that I had, it dropped. Shalom, Steve. So it dropped in value. So I bought another share. Then it dropped in value even more. I bought 2 shares. It kept dropping. So then I bought 4 shares. Then I bought 8 shares because it kept going down. Then I bought 16, 32. Then I bought 64. So I had a total of 128 shares. Do you see the pattern I was doing?
Yeah.
I basically was doubling the number of shares I have. The reason being to lower the cost basis. The idea being, let's say you have one share that's worth $100 and it drops all the way down to $50 a share. If you buy one share at $50 a share, now you've spent $150 for 2 shares. So you divide 150 by 2, that's $75 a share on average. So instead of needing it to go all the way back up to 100 and selling it at 100 to get your money back, you only need it to get back up to 75 to sell it to break even.
Oh, okay. That's sound.
So what I did was, like I said, I bought one share at 26, then sold it at 29, bought it again at 29, and then it just kept dropping. So I kept doubling it. I would buy one to double the number of shares I had. It would drop more. I would buy the same number of shares that I already have to reduce the cost basis. So I reduced the cost basis all the way to like 10 something by doing that. And then earlier today, it went up like $2 and I made $170 and I sold the shares.
Well, that sounds like a pretty sound way to go, especially when you're averaging those shares and splitting and dividing. That makes a lot of sense. So, like, how much time do you spend on this every week?
It depends on your strategy, but my current strategy, I just basically check during my work breaks and usually give it maybe 3 to 5 minutes basically about 5 minutes every couple hours, I would say. But there was a time, if I was doing a different strategy before, where I was literally spending hours and hours, and that was exhausting. And it really could be a full-time job if you're actively trying to make money on it. Instead, I figure, you know what, I'm not going to stress it. I'm just going to check it when I get around to it. And if I'm making a good profit in some of them, I'll sell for profit. So, like I said, there's so many different strategies, and you really need to have money to make the profit. So, and the idea is also to keep putting more money in. So yeah, I would recommend that you just keep how much do you have? Less than 1,000 in there?
No.
More than 1,000?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you made any money? Like,
no, just in interest. This is it's high interest for a savings account.
Right. If you just let it sit there. If you just let it sit there, it gives you interest, right?
Yeah, I'm just kind of concerned about gambling, and it's taken me 2 years to save this money. I want to increase it, but at the same time, I don't have a valid strategy. That's what I just got from you, a valid strategy.
But like, so let's say you have $1,000. I know you said you have more than 1,000, but let's just stick it at 1,000 just for example. And so, if you're trying to play it safe because you're worried about losing your savings, see, the way I do it is I don't care. I'm a high risk trader. I mean, I do care to a certain extent, but I will make bold trades that sometimes could be risky. But because I'm going to be putting more money in, I can recover most likely. So because I'm in for the long haul, I should be fine.
Yeah. Well, some of these that go down precipitously, you can only expect them to pop back up. They're not just going to disappear.
Unless it's like a really bad company.
That's right.
So let's say you have 1,000. Instead of putting all your 1,000 into a stock and you can't buy anything anymore, instead you could do either only 25% or only 50%. So the idea would be like, if you want to make it simple, stick with one stock, or some people recommend diversifying, so stick with 2 stocks, 2 or 3. And so but only do like a 25% or 33% or 50% as your starting point. Then do the strategy that I said. If it goes down at least 10%, if it drops at least 10%, buy more and buy at the exact amount. So like, let's say you have $250 of one stock. You have $750 left over, right? So if it drops down 10%, buy another.
You get the same amount of stock for less price.
Right. So buy it for like, what would it be?
50.
Well, if it drops 10%, that would be a loss of what, $25? $25. So you buy it for $225, another share, or however many shares it is. And then if it keeps dropping further, another 10%, well, actually it'd be more like 5%, because you're only reducing it like in half. So when you buy at 10%, the same number of shares, now instead of being at a loss of 10%, you're at a loss of 5%. But if it goes back to loss of 10% with more shares, then you buy again at the lower price, the same number of shares. Now you have even more. So now you'd have to do let's see, you'd have to do something like $400 worth of shares. And now you are pretty much out of money that you put in the account if you only put 1,000. But by doing that, you're able to, if it drops as much, if your initial investment drops as much as 20% in value, you can reduce it to 5% simply by buying at that lower. And if you think it's going to go even lower, wait. And if it drops even further, like if it drops to 20% before you do your initial repurchase, then that first 200 and whatever dollars you spend, it'll reduce it all the way from 20% down to 10%. So, yeah.
Okay, what's your pick for this week? Would you go as far as to pick for this week, or have you?
No, there's not really weekly picks. You just kind of have to try to look at different companies, and then just, if you find a company you like, just stick with it for the long haul. That's what I would recommend.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Who asked this question?
Jackson did.
I asked a question.
Oh, Jackson, what does this have to do with anything?
Andrew has made
biblical.
Andrew has made thousands and thousands of dollars on his stock market picks.
Matthew chapter 25.
Yeah, Matthew 25.
That's because the devil's telling him stuff.
No,
He's going for it.
Why is that? Because you're dealing with money? That's just what that parable's all about. You get some money, you invest it in something, you make.
Well, the Bible says that you got to get money by working, not by investing.
Where does he get his money? And isn't it work to try to pick these stocks? It sure is.
You think so?
Melissa, read Matthew chapter 25.
Yeah.
The parable
Okay,
of the
so I could
talents.
give you $1,000 and let you play with it and see what happens.
Yeah, I would do it. He's successful at this.
Good job,
charmed.
Omaya. Yay! You're great.
He's blessed by Sapphire Bowl.
Sapphire means scribe, of course.
I'm about to enter Walmart.
Oh, nice.
Are you in Walmart?
I'll
Not
still
yet.
be listening as long as my phone lasts, but I'll be in
Okay.
Walmart here in a minute.
Well, we're just about to wrap up this discussion on stocks. We were actually waiting for you to come on, Melissa.
That's right. So I need to go find some questions then, unless somebody has some.
Well, you could always look for some, and
There's plenty of questions. I just have to get out there and dig them up this time. Let me see. First question just came in today. This is a good question, but it doesn't have especially to do with Bible. It has more to do with Christianity. What was Constantine the Great, a saint or a dictator? I'd be happy to try to answer that. I don't know if you guys know enough about him, except for the propaganda you've heard on Facebook and other places. No, he didn't change the worship day to Sunday. No, he didn't throw all these books out of the Bible. No, he didn't do those things. But I read all the time on there people cursing the memory of Constantine because he supposedly ruined the Christian church. If it wasn't for him, there probably wouldn't be any church. You probably would never have come to the knowledge that is naturally of the scripture or the gospel. He deserves a lot of credit, not only for that, but for defeating his three co-emperors who all hated believers and killed him every chance they could. And his father was a Chaldee believer of Britain, and he had a lot to commend him. You probably need to go read his letters rather than just judge from what YouTube or these idiots who don't know anything will tell you about it. But I think that he was a dictator, and he also was a saint to a great extent. He did some things wrong, that's for sure. He had his son murdered, but there's probably a pretty good reason for that. If you're on top of the Roman Empire with three other ones with you, you're going to be, his desire was to beat the other pagan empires to be the sole emperor because he was a believer. And he was a believer since his childhood. And I could tell you a lot more, but all I'm saying is, why don't you, before you judge him in that way, go read what he actually wrote, or read what Eusebius writes about him, who knew him, or read what Lactantius, who was his teacher, says about him, and you may change your mind.
I would say both and neither, in the sense that I don't actually believe he was a saint, but many churches do. And in terms of a dictator, the meaning dictator is negative connotation, but it actually etymologically comes from a word that really just means someone who dictates or orders things.
Yeah,
and
right.
So in the original meaning of a dictator, pretty much any leader, any king or emperor, by definition, is a dictator. In fact, God himself is a dictator. But we wouldn't say that because that sounds bad.
Of course he is.
But he's also a tyrant, because the word tyrant etymologically
Gibor.
also means ruler, tyrant. But it eventually came to have a negative connotation because rulers are often corrupt.
And, you know, in the passage in Isaiah that is often attributed as a prophecy of the coming of Messiah. They, wonderful counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Well, in that is the word El Gibor, which means tyrant God, El Gibor. So I agree with what you're saying there, definitely.
This is just a quick aside, but did you guys know that the Septuagint of Isaiah translates that passage very differently?
Yeah.
I'll just read that
Okay.
because it's kind of cool the way it differs. So I'm going to read them side by side. This is literally the same exact same passage, but it's basically the same Hebrew. But the Hebrew is interpreted differently by the scribes. So the question is, which one is correct? And I'll read it side by side, and you guys can make the conclusion for yourselves, which you think is correct. Although I would have my view based on my understanding of the scriptures and textual criticism. But so the Masoretic text, and now you know what the Masoretes did? They basically went to the Hebrew letters and they wrote vowel markings, and those vowel markings actually told you the way that you're supposed to read these words, even though the Hebrew without those vowel markings can be read legitimately in different ways and have completely different meanings if you read it with different vowels. But instead, they forcibly imposed vowels they wanted to put there to make it say what they thought it should say. Of course, Dead Sea Scroll writers did the same thing. They didn't do vowel markings, but they added vowel letters to add their interpretation. Samaritans did the same thing. Probably the scribes behind the Septuagint did the same thing. But you just have to keep in mind that this is something scribes did. They added vowels for interpretation. And so that is why we see so many differences in the manuscripts. Part of it has to do with vowels added. So let's see here. Oh yeah, it's chapter 9. I was looking wrong chapter. Isaiah. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So now let's see what the Septuagint says. It says, for a child is born to us, and a son is given to us, whose government is upon his shoulder. So far it sounds the same, right? Now, here's where it's different. And his name is called the Messenger of Great Counsel. For I will bring peace upon the princes and health to him. And then it continues with basically the same thing that the Hebrew has. But where's the everlasting Father? It's not there. So you got Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, compared to Messenger of Great Counsel, for I will bring peace upon the princes and health to him. Completely different. Which one is correct? Septuagint.
Yeah.
But so Jesse asks, let's finish the Constantine thing first, because I did have something else to say.
Okay.
So, whoops. Okay, so Constantine, like Jackson said, I've actually been saying this for years, that people have falsely accused Constantine of things that are not true. And I've pointed to people to the writings of Eusebius and the speech, the sermon, basically, of Constantine himself. And you can see what Constantine said. And when you read what he says, it's hard to really conclude that he was a pagan after his conversion.
Absolutely.
But the question is, what did he convert to? And was his faith adequate for salvation? Many Christians believe they're saved, and they have converted to their understanding of Christianity. So, but the Messiah did say to the people who said, Lord, Lord, to the Messiah, they said, Lord, Lord, did we not do these things in your name? We did all these miracles in your name. And they had faith in him. And he tells them, go away, you workers of injustice. I never knew you. So not only does he not know them, not only does he reject them, he actually says he never knew them ever. So that means they were never part of the true faith. They were always deceived. They were always in condemnation, but they thought they were saved. So the question is, was Constantine saved? Was he righteous enough for salvation? The answer is, we don't know, because the reality is salvation is more complicated than a simple black and white, in the sense that Yahweh judges people based on their hearts according to what has been revealed to them. So the light that has been revealed to them, based on how they respond to that, how righteous they respond to what is shown them. So if Constantine righteously fulfilled what was revealed to him, and Constantine was faithful in all that was entrusted to him, even though he fell short of following the full laws, most likely, he still may have reached an adequate level of obedience that he did not willfully disobey any commandments that he was aware of. And so because of that, he may have been saved. Or he may be given a second chance in the 1,000-year kingdom that I believe will happen, the millennial kingdom. I believe the millennial kingdom is a time where people have a second chance based on the sole mercy of Yahweh, who he decides to give mercy to. Some people who weren't 100% righteous, who didn't have perfect faith, may have had enough faith to merit from Yahweh the grace and mercy to be given that second chance in the millennial kingdom. But we don't know, because it's Yahweh's decision. We will find out. We will find out in the future. But so
absolutely, that is a wonderful answer, and I agree with that 100%. And we have not always agreed on this, but yes, I don't know who came around to whose point of view, but I think you can't really tell about Yahweh's mercy until you let Yahweh sort them out.
But you can tell based on their, I believe you can tell certain people will not be given mercy based on how evil they are in this life. I think there's the person has to be seeking and truly want to be righteous and making an effort.
Do you think Laverne will get a second chance?
Well, he has to accept Paul, otherwise, because Paul is the savior.
Yeah. Well, Jesse has a great question here for you, and
let me say one more thing though. I actually have a idea answer in mind, but one more thing about the Constantine thing is there are some apocryphal texts which claim in the Ethiopian Bible, the Ethiopian Book of Clement claims to prophesy of the coming of Constantine and how Constantine would bring about righteousness in the church, in the sense of and how he will convert, essentially, and how he will see the sign in the sky and stuff, that story of how he saw the cross in the sky type of thing. It claims to prophesy that. So if that was a true prophecy, that would be pretty cool. But of course, that scholars date that to a later time. because they don't believe prophecy occurs before the time. So
Doesn't one apocrypha also say, have Jesus prophesying Paul? I don't know which one it is. I can't remember anymore.
yes, that is the Epistle of the Apostles. That's also in the Ethiopian.
Would you repeat that, please, Onio? The
Which part?
Epistle of what?
Oh, the Epistle of the Apostles, also known
Okay,
as,
thank you.
the Latin name for it is Epistula Apostolorum. That is what it is sometimes referred to, such as on Wikipedia or in scholarly works, but its translation is Epistle of the Apostles. And the only full copy that's been preserved is in the Ethiopian Bible. No other language has the full text. And the only other language that has part of the text is Coptic, also known as Egyptian.
Good.
So let's get to this temple scroll question. Does the New Testament quote remotely a temple scroll? Now, I've talked about before about Epistle of Barnabas, but that's not, for the purposes of the question, we understand the New Testament to refer to the regular 27 books. And so, off the top of my head, there is only one passage which I think is pretty compelling to allude to the temple scroll. And that is, let me pull it up to you guys. Hold on. This is in the letters of Paul. I believe it's Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, I believe, but I'll double check.
I thought the epistles were the wives of the apostles.
Say it again.
Aren't the epistles the wives of the apostles?
Wives?
The wives of the apostles?
I'm not getting the joke.
That's
Or
'cause
is
I
it?
didn't say it right.
So,
You
okay.
called several sayings out of Barnabas in your treatise on the temple scroll that may have come from the temple scroll, because
there's none that were confirmed to definitely be from the temple scroll in the Epistle of Barnabas. But Barnabas has tons of quotations not in the Torah, but claiming to be from the Torah. And the nature of those quotations matches the temple scroll style in the sense of the extra content, which we can discuss that. But first, I'm going to give you the one that seems to me to be a direct allusion. But it's something that's like, the best way to put it is if this is not referencing the temple scroll, then it's an extremely amazing coincidence that this is the case. But okay, so 1 Corinthians 9:9, it says, "For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain." And Paul gives his commentary. Is it oxen God is concerned about? Verse 10. Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, is it written. Now, this is the cool part. That he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. Okay? So, at first glance, this is not impressive at all. Like, I don't get it, right? How is this referencing the temple scroll? So we look at the Old Testament, the Law of Moses, and we look and see where is this passage? You should not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. So let's see where that is. We will find that in Deuteronomy chapter 25. Now I'm going to read you chapter 25, parts of it, not the whole thing. Okay, so chapter 25, verse 1. If there is a dispute between men and they come to court, that they may judge them, and they justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, then it shall be, if the wicked man deserves to be beaten, that the judge will cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence according to his guilt with a certain number of blows. 40 blows he may give him, no more, lest he should exceed this and beat him with many blows above this, and your brother be humiliated in your sight. You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Hold on a sec here. The words "the grain" is not in the text, actually. So it just says, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out. That is the exact passage that Paul quoted from the law of Moses, right? But what's the very next verse? If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be to a stranger outside. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. So it gives the levirate marriage laws. Then it says, if men fight together and the wife of one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of the one attacking him, and puts out her hand and seizes him by the genitals, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eye shall not pity. You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who behave unrighteously, they are an abomination to the Lord your God. Okay, so I read that because I want you guys to see the context. The context is justice to others. If there's a dispute between men, right? Hold on. Can you guys hear me still? Okay, my computer was freezing for a sec. All right, so basically, well, my browser is acting up at the moment. Jackson, are you back now? Nope, not back yet. So anyways, all right. So basically, this chapter of 25 is talking about justice towards others. It talks about giving 40 blows to someone who deserves it. And it talks about levirate marriage, justice to the dead brother who died, so that his line can be continued. It talks about men fighting. If his genitals are damaged by the woman, then she is to be harmed in the same capacity. And it talks about the differing measurements of weight, that you have a just scale. So it's all about justice, right?
Is that like
others.
Lorraine Bobbitt?
I don't know.
You know Lorraine Bobbitt?
No.
I know, Lorena Bobbitt.
Wouldn't this apply to her though, Vicky?
Well,
what did she
I'm
do?
interested that he said if she grabs hold of his genitals, that she gets her hand cut off.
That's what the translation claims, but I don't believe that.
Lorena Bobbitt used a knife.
Yeah.
So I believe that translation is false. So, but the Bible teaches an eye for an eye. And so instead of a hand being cut off, I believe if she destroys the genitals of a man or a woman, then her genitals are to be destroyed in the same way.
They did sew it back on. And evidently that worked. But Lorraine, I think she went to jail, didn't she, Vicky?
She did. but I'm sure she's out by now. As a matter of fact, I think she remarried, which I think is kind of risky, but okay.
Yep.
Definitely risky.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
And Steve says, was hers self-defense or her being jealous or her just being something?
I think he was like, I wouldn't say she was in imminent danger.
What did Jesse
I
share?
think he was
can't
like
see
asleep. I believe he was asleep, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but what was the reason?
At Calais. When was that, Jackson? Back in the 80s?
Oh, I'd say 80s or early 90s.
He cheated on her.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So she
Did he?
claimed.
I couldn't remember.
Well, so the proper punishment for that is the death penalty. But if you can't prove it, then you get a divorce. That's the way it works.
Or in her case, she just decided to just cut it off.
Yeah, but that's not eye for an eye. That's the problem. So yeah, so she definitely deserved. I mean, I think they put people in jail for things that should not be in jail. But the problem is our society doesn't follow the Torah. So jail is the next best thing we can hope in a situation like that.
I heard that he got a wooden prosthesis.
Did you say wooden,
Yes.
Jackson?
Isn't that right, Sandra?
A wooden penis.
No.
Are you talking to me, Jackson? I'm sorry, what?
Now we're going to have to take that word out.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Jackson doesn't allow. Is it YouTube or is it Hebrew Nation Radio?
Well, I never have been censored on YouTube or Hebrew Nation. However, all the time on Facebook, even if I put an event up like this, they take it right off.
Weird.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry, Jackson. I mean, that was the anatomically
No.
correct name.
It was all part of the answer.
So, justice, the law of Deuteronomy chapter 25. So in this context, you have this random verse, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out. In the middle between lashing someone 40 times and brothers marrying their dead brother's wife. That's a very odd place to put it, right? It's kind of random. Well, if you compare Deuteronomy to the Temple Scroll, Deuteronomy is very random in a lot of its laws, whereas the Temple Scroll is much more in harmony with the proper order of the laws you would expect them to come in. I believe the Temple Scroll is the original version, and that the scribes didn't like the original version. They clipped up parts of it, and because it was a mess, they had to rearrange stuff to make it make some sense. And by rearranging it, they actually made some parts seem more random. So in the context this law is in, it sounds like this is a law about justice towards animals. You should not muzzle an ox while it treads out. That is the implication would be don't muzzle an ox, because if you muzzle an ox, it's not going to be able to eat, and that would not be good for the ox. That would not be just to the ox. That's the implication of the context of this verse. But Paul is saying that implication is wrong. He says, is it oxen God is concerned about? Or did he say it for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. So he says this law was written not in the context of justice, not in the context of oxen is God concerned about, justice towards oxen. He said it in the context of plowing. He said it in the context of plowing. Get it? So the context of plowing. So where does Deuteronomy say plow? Let's see where else Deuteronomy says plow. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 10. So not chapter 25, but chapter 22, verse 10. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray, and hide yourself from them. You shall certainly bring them back to your brother. And if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your own house, and it shall remain with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. You shall do the same with his donkey, and so shall you do with his garment. With any lost thing of your brother's, which he has lost and you have found, you shall do likewise. You must not hide yourself. You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road, and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift up again. A woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. If a bird's nest happens to be before you along the way, in any tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, with the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely let the mother go and take the young for yourself, that it may be well with you, and you may prolong days. When you build a new house, then you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring guilt of bloodshed on your house if anyone falls from it. You shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seed, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. That's the verse I want you to think of. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. Then it says, you shall not wear a garment of different sorts, wool and linen mixed together. You shall make tassels on the four corners of the clothing with which you cover. So, what is the context of this chapter? 22 of this section. The context here, first it starts talking about donkeys being lost, right? And respecting your keeping the animal safe. And then it starts going to laws about how to treat animals, like the bird nest with the eggs. But then it starts talking about mixing things that shouldn't be mixed, like clothing should not be mixed, contrary to gender. And when the plants should not be mixed. And garments, the material that the garment is made of should not be of mixed quality. And it talks about also the type of tassels you're supposed to have in your garment. So all that is also with ox and donkey mixing together. It says you should not plow with an ox and a donkey together. So we've got Deuteronomy 25 in a completely different chapter, which says you should not muzzle an ox while it treads out. Chapter 22 says you shall not plow with an ox and a donkey. Paul says the context of the law saying you should not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain is plowing. That's the context. So let's read what the Temple Scroll says. Because the Temple Scroll says the context is about plowing, which matches Paul's argument. Paul's argument actually is much stronger if the Temple Scroll is what he was using. Like I said, this could be an extreme coincidence, but the parallel is shocking because Paul's argument follows along exactly with what the Temple Scroll says for the context. So I'm pulling up the Temple Scroll now.
Paul doesn't actually cite that quotation, does he?
No. That's why it's not 100%. But the question, of course, was, let's see, where was the question? Does the New Testament quote remotely the Temple Scroll? So it is a remote quote. It's not a verbatim quote. But so I'm going to pull this up for you guys.
if you're into Temple Scroll or want to be, and want to see Onia's exegesis of those passages that are found elsewhere that resemble or quote the Temple Scroll, we have that. And he already gave me permission to send it to somebody if they wanted it. And I would be happy to send it to you. It's long, it's very detailed, but the essay at the end is really enlightening.
And
Changed my mind.
there will be a sequel about it. As in, there's more to come in work on it.
Are you talking about the work you did on Deuteronomy a few years ago?
Yes. Basically, that was a preliminary thing. It was not intended for people to take this as, okay, this is ready to be shared with the world, like with everybody.
You had two versions of it, or two, I guess you would say.
I did
maybe
a
an
slight
update.
I did a slight update of it, yeah, but it really needs a major update because there's so much more I've since come to learn about the subject, and I have much more scholarly documents. And guess what? New edition of the Temple Scroll coming out next month, which I will be purchasing. Probably it's going to be $200 or something crazy like that. It's a scholarly edition of the Temple Scroll, a new edition, and here's what it says for the description of the Temple Scroll, the new version. This is by Schiffman, Lawrence Schiffman.
Oh, yeah.
So it says, in this volume, Schiffman and Gross, his last name is Gross. It's not Gross, but it is Gross. So, in this volume, Schiffman and Gross present a new edition of all the manuscript evidence for the Temple Scroll from Qumran. It includes innumerable new readings and restorations of all the manuscripts, as well as a detailed critical apparatus comparing the manuscripts of the Temple Scroll, as well as Qumran biblical manuscripts and the ancient versions. Each manuscript is provided with a new translation, and a commentary is presented for the main text. Also included are a general introduction, bibliography of published works on the text, catalog of photographic evidence, and concordance, including all vocables in all the manuscripts and the restorations. This work promises to move research on the Temple Scroll to a new level. I said June, but apparently it's pushed to July, so it's actually July. So not next month, 2 months from now. So that's going to be exciting. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I actually heard about this a couple years ago. I knew they were working on it. I just didn't know when they would get around to it. But they finally have finished it. It's about to come out. And so that's going to be crucial for my project as well. So here is the passage.
Can we invest in your project?
Yes, you can. However way you want to do it. You can invest your prayer. You can. Some people decide to donate, which is always an option. I typically try not to ask people because I don't want to be that type of person.
Of course. Like just going around and asking people for money.
I'm just going to mention this guy, James Strem. So I appreciate him for some things. You know, he has some good stuff, but he's the type of person who will always post, I need money. Please send money. Please send money. Please send money. Every post, constantly. And I think it actually does great harm and pushes people away when you do it like that. It's my opinion. If people believe in a ministry, they will feel led to give if that is their calling to give to that ministry. So let's see here. I did start something recently on my YouTube channel. I actually need to make a video about this to advertise this. But so YouTube has something called members. So I created a membership thing for YouTube. It's a pretty basic thing. Basically, you can do $1 membership, $10 membership, and $100 membership. $1 membership is the pretty basic. $10, what was it? $10 is a special like either Bible study or like live video discussion, like kind of like what we're doing right now, but like just with the people who do the $10 thing. Everybody on that who does the $10 thing, I put there as the reward, because on YouTube you're supposed to list like rewards. It's kind of similar to Patreon for like memberships. So basically $10, everybody who does $10, we do like a special private discussion thing. And then if you really want to be bold and do $100, then you get a invite to in-person conference where you can actually attend a conference with me. I'll organize it, and we'll just visit each other and just do fellowship with each other. This is all hypothetical because no one has actually done this, but I put the options there just in case someone wants to do it.
Where, on Patreon?
No, it's on YouTube.
Oh,
but I need to advertise it though. But the downside with all these different ways of donating is YouTube, Patreon, they actually take a percentage cut of the money you donate. So if you want to guarantee that the person you want to donate to gets all the money you're trying to donate to them, then don't use Patreon, don't use YouTube, because they're going to take some of your money and not give it.
Yahad, I'll send the full amount right over to him, and you can have a tax receipt.
Why don't you use Facebook? Facebook doesn't cost anything either.
Yeah, you can send money through Facebook, different ways to do it. But with all that said, let's get to the answer here, and that is the Temple Scroll, column 52. There's different, listed by columns, not chapters. And so column 52 says, keep in mind the Temple Scroll is literally the same book of Deuteronomy, just in different order and different passages. Okay, so here's the Temple Scroll says, column 52, line 12. And you shall not muzzle an ox while it is threshing, and you shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. Well, what do you know? Those two verses are together. And it's the context of plowing, right? And guess what? It's in a completely different context than chapter 22 and 25. Here's what the full context is for the Temple Scroll. It says, you shall not sacrifice to me an ox or a sheep in which is any serious blemish, for they are an abomination to me. And you shall not sacrifice to me a cow or a ewe or she-goat which are pregnant, for they are an abomination to me. And you shall not slaughter a cow or a ewe and its young on the same day, and you shall not kill a mother with its young. Every firstborn born to your cattle and sheep, the males you shall consecrate to me. You shall not work with the firstborn of your cow or shear the firstborn of your sheep. You shall eat it before me year after year in the place which I shall choose. But if there should be any blemish in it, lame or blind, or any serious blemish, you shall not sacrifice it to me. In your gates you shall eat it, the pure and the impure among you together, like the gazelle or the deer. Only the blood you may not eat. You shall pour it on the ground like water and cover it with dust. And you shall not muzzle an ox while it is threshing, and you shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. You shall not slaughter an ox or sheep or he-goat which are pure in any of your gates, which are nearer than 3 days' walk from my temple. But instead you shall slaughter it inside my temple, making it into a burnt offering or a peace offering. And you shall eat and rejoice before me in the place where I shall choose to put my name upon it. And all pure animals in which there is a blemish you shall eat in your gates, far from my temple, at a radius of 30 stadia. You shall not slaughter near my temple, because it is unfit flesh. You shall not eat the flesh of ox, sheep, or goat within my city, which I sanctify by placing my name within it, which is not come into my temple. They shall sacrifice it there, and they shall pour out its blood over the base of the altar of the burnt offering, and they shall burn its fat. It breaks off there. But guess what? The context here is talking about sacrifice, how to worship God, how to be pure. It's not talking about justice towards animals. The entire context here is not about justice to animals. It's about holiness to temple worship. So this fits Paul's argument strikingly, because Paul is saying that the context, Deuteronomy chapter 25, clearly has a context of justice towards animals and towards others in general. But Paul says that's not what it's talking about. Instead, it's talking about that it's for our sakes, not for the animal's sake, that this law was written, so that the one who plows should plow in hope. And then we have the temple scroll saying it's not about animals' sake, it's about our sake, so that we'll be holy for temple worship. And it says, you shall not muzzle an ox. And immediately after it says, and you shall not plow with an ox and ass together. So it's talking about plowing, just like Paul says. That's my best example of the New Testament that we know of, the traditional 27 books, appearing to allude to the temple scroll. I don't know if you guys find that compelling or not. What are your guys' thoughts?
Absolutely. I think it is. I think anytime you can get that close, especially with that second little part of the verse there, the B portion of the verse, maybe he isn't quoting it directly, but he's thinking of it.
Yeah, it's just so striking. So anyway, that's the best example. But why does it have to be the New Testament? What about the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament does essentially quote the temple scroll. Not verbatim, but it quotes laws only in the temple scroll. And they are, in fact, in the temple scroll. There's many places in the Old Testament. Probably the best book indicating this is the book of Nehemiah. It's a gold mine of references. But also 1 Samuel quotes the temple scroll. There's just so much amazing stuff with the temple scroll. Anyways, so Jackson, do we have other questions?
Sure.
Trim in the Red Ministries, yes.
That is funny. That is funny, but he has a lot of really good stuff.
Yeah.
And I've gone to him several times, and I supported him for a long time. But just the constant dunning for money and never get a thanks or anything. Oh.
We wish him the best, of course.
Sure.
But,
all right, here it is. This is a good one because it's one you have to think about. How many churches did Paul plant according to the book of Acts? Now, there's an answer to this. I answered it, but also someone else answered it. I want to give you the other person's answer first while you're thinking about it.
I would need to hear the question again. Sorry. Can you
How
say
many churches did Paul plant according to the book of Acts?
0.
And well, I got to be pretty close to 0. But here's what one answer from self-described theology expert. Some scholars count 14 or more, directly or indirectly. We know that he planted the church at Ephesus, which in turn branched out to plant many others. There were also organic churches in Philippi and Corinth. Then there are churches planted in Cyprus and Crete. There's also Thyatira, Philadelphia, Smyrna, Laodicea, Pergamum, Syria, Arabia, Sardis. Some count up to 20 churches planted by Paul, either directly or indirectly. I disagree with that entirely. I'm wondering where this person is getting this kind of so-called scholarship, especially if you just confine it to Acts.
Well, the Messiah, directly or indirectly, established many churches as well.
True. But here again, the kicker is, according to the book of Acts, but if you go to another book, one of the pastorals, I think, Paul says that all have deserted me. All have deserted me. And why, I would wonder, if Paul started the 7 churches of the Revelation, why did they get a bishop there of the circumcision? That doesn't make sense at all. I think that in Cyprus and some of these other places, I think the main church planter was Barnabas. But then again, the only one that I can think of in Acts that's even close to that is the church in Antioch. Do you know more than that?
Well, truth be told, I don't really know much about Paul's, and like the general history of the book of Acts, I don't really know by heart that well.
And besides, it's really not a history anyway. It's more like I would say a history of salvation or soteriology rather than a literal history, because he feeds too much off Josephus, for one thing. As I've mentioned before, I don't want to go into it. I just wanted to show you what a so-called Bible scholar with a doctor's degree in theology has to say about this. How could you be any farther off than that? It shows you the great range of people who claim to have doctor's degrees that don't know a daggone thing about it.
The thing is, the book of Acts is not really about Paul, although it features him a lot, but it really is not his.
No, it's not.
He features a lot, but the thing is, unfortunately, the Acts of Paul are lost, not in the sense of they're not fully preserved anymore. We have lots of fragments of the Acts of Paul, and some substantial sections of it we do have. And so we can actually get an idea of Paul's ministry based on the apocryphal Acts of Paul. Mm-hmm. I would say look more to the Acts of Paul to learn more about Paul's life than the Acts of the Apostles.
How about the Acts of Paul and Thecla? Do you think any of that?
Well, that was included as part of the Acts of Paul. Yeah. That actually originally is part of it, and it was excerpted from it. But is it legit? I think so, but I think, we talk about are certain documents legit, but we have to keep in mind, of course, that there were changes over time. Mm-hmm. So what was the original story of Acts of Paul and Thecla? Well, guess what? There's actually 2 versions we know of. There's one that's embedded in the Acts of Paul, and then there's another one which is its own thing, and it does this weird epilogue. The epilogue talks about how Thecla is in her old age, and someone tries to rape her and something, and I can't remember it. But it's like
all about chastity in there.
Yeah, so it definitely seems to be added by the scribes in that version.
Obviously, Thecla is in love with the elder Paul.
Depends what you mean.
Follows him everywhere, ends up in the arena with him, encounters and baptizes a bear. Was it a bear? They baptized. No, it was a lion.
Well, Paul baptizes the lion, Thecla doesn't baptize anyone except herself.
Yeah, right. She's with him at the time. I got a couple other from Paul that are, I think you know this better than you say you do.
Well, the weird thing with Thecla is she baptizes herself, and then Paul basically says, that's sufficient for your baptism. So the weird thing is, most of the time, the scriptures seem to say that in order for baptism to be authentic, someone else has to baptize you. So it is very peculiar. This is probably the only example we have of someone baptizing themselves and it being considered authentic baptism.
And do you remember what she baptized herself in?
I think it was just the water of...
In her own blood. She baptized herself in her own blood. At least in my version.
There might be different versions of that. I from the way I remember it, of course, I'm going off my memory, not the actual text. I remember her bathing in water in the arena.
Yeah, I think that was blood. But as you said, there are undoubtedly several different versions of this. How about this one?
Tertullian said that that's a false book because women are not allowed to baptize.
Oh gosh. What does Paul say about hell?
He talks about Sheol and
True.
And death.
But
Doesn't really talk too much about hell, except if you look at the Apocalypse of Paul.
Of course, of course. Of course, he couldn't have written that because Paul does not seem to be a believer in an immutable soul.
Maybe he changed his mind.
Eternal soul.
Maybe he changed his mind.
And another quick one. What does the Apostle Paul mean when he says, abusers of themselves with mankind? Male homosexuality?
That's what I would say, but you, of course, modern people, there's actually a movement of modern interpreters to try to remove interpretation of homosexuality from the scriptures, like a negative interpretation. And people will try to say...
John Shelby Spong, the Episcopal bishop, is one of the big movers on that. I think he's still alive, but...
They try to say Jonathan had a homosexual relationship with David, all this crazy stuff.
Yeah, they do.
Because the scripture says that the love David had for Jonathan was greater than the love he had for women. And so they take that to mean, of
course, those are homosexuals, no doubt about it.
Yeah, so basically, you got to keep in mind the Bible was written. Who was it written by? It was written by an ancient tribal people. Whether or not it's divinely inspired, I believe it was, but it was written in the context of a warlike people, a tribal group, a nomad group, and they had ancient values, ancient culture. So what do we see? We see animal sacrifice. We see slavery. Not only is it allowed, it is sanctioned, it is blessed, permitted in a way that Yahweh is approving it. Not simply saying, I'll allow it even though I don't like it. The way the Bible speaks of slavery is it's a good thing, you can do it, but you're only allowed to do it to people who are not of your nation. Which sounds racist, right? Well, that's what the Bible says. That's the ancient culture. You have to grapple with what it says. You can't just change what it says to reflect what you want it to say. We can't make it say the modern values because that would be grossly violating the basis of interpreting documents. You can't just make it say what you want it to say. So like all the stuff about feminism and everything. To apply feminist ideas that are completely foreign to the scriptures and say that that's what the writers meant is crazy. The ancient writers were basically The ancient writers of the Bible were basically Canaanites. They were basically Babylonians, Mesopotamians, Assyrians. They shared the same basic values as they did. So they didn't believe in all this like hokey stuff that modern people believe. That's my take on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just skipped over like 4 or 5 poll questions in a row before I found another one that I thought was interesting.
Seems like they ask about Paul a lot.
Yeah, they do. Everybody seems to want to know about Paul, and I take any typical answer that I give on that subject, and there's like thousands and thousands of views. So there's some interest out there from people.
Let me say, with the exception of like talking with you in these meetings,
Mhm.
I almost never talk about Paul. And why is that? Like when I make a video on YouTube, I don't usually do these days, but when I get around to it, I almost never talk about Paul.
Well, that's
And
because you're a theoretical theologian, and I'm more of a historian. So I'm interested in the characters specifically. And so if I'm going to do stuff like that, I'm going to get questions about that, just like you get theological questions. That's probably part of it.
Yeah, but the thing is, I also focus on like, there's just so much deeper stuff that like just seems much more interesting. Like like the whole Temple Scroll stuff, like the fact that the entire law of Moses was corrupted, the fact that the radical changes to the Old Testament and tons of extra books, the whole Enoch stuff, Jubilees, all these ancient documents. There's just so much depth that
People aren't that deep, Onia.
I know, but
People
that's
aren't that deep. They're not that deep into it. And there's a whole gob of text to read just to get through the text itself. They just don't want to do that. Or else you wouldn't have dumb questions like these. Like this one. What happened to the Romans that crucified Jesus? Now, I know you can answer that one. And then we're about done. We got
they
5
died.
minutes left. Yeah, they all died. Do you have any answer to that?
Does anyone here? Vicky says she has a question.
Okay, I'm off.
I do.
My
It's probably a dumb one though.
All
think
questions are acceptable.
They can't be any worse than mine tonight.
Well, I think it might be a pretty quick one. And what brought this to my mind was you reading and talking about the different animals and stuff. In the New Testament, it talks about separating the sheep and the goats and things like that. And so I'm wondering when it came to the Passover, why Yahweh allowed the lamb to come from the sheep. It could be a sheep or a goat.
So let's look at the passage.
It has to do with their idea of what the Hebrew word for cattle is. This is what I was taught in seminary anyway, that cattle, we think of cows, but in those days, cattle meant any kind of ruminant on 4 legs. And so it could be a sheep, it could be a goat, it could be a cow.
But a lamb can only be a sheep or a goat, not a calf.
O Lamb of God, that taketh away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. It's a lamb.
Isn't Paul the only one that said that? Or was that John the Baptist?
So there's a few things to say about this. First of all, you can't take every picture and put them together. So, for example, we're supposed to be the bride of Christ, right? The church is supposed to be the bride of Messiah. And yet, one of the parables says that we are the bridesmaids that attend the wedding. So are we the bride, or are we the bridesmaids? Well, if you put them together, you come up with a contradiction. But they're not intended to be interpreted together. They're intended to be separate. They're entirely separate parables, where one parable, we're the bride. Another parable, we're bridesmaids. Like, they're not all intended to be the same. So when we look at the sheep and the goats, when it says that he will separate the sheep from the goats, that doesn't mean that every time we see sheep and goats, or every time we see goat, that's a negative reference. We can't assume that. But so if you do want to go that route of negative, the fact is that the Messiah was a sheep, but he was regarded as a goat by those who crucified him, right? And so he was both a sheep and a goat. He was a sheep to those who loved him. He was a goat to those who hated him. That's one way you could look at it if you're going that direction. But I would just make it simpler and say, when the law was given, the law was not concerned with, oh no, the goats are bad. We can't mention goats. That's not good. Goats are actually clean animals, of course. They're clean. So they're not unclean. So when the law was given, there was no idea that this was a bad thing. It's only later on, when metaphors are being applied, parables, analogies are being applied, that one takes this if you take this passage and say, well, this means that goats are not bad in the New Testament passage, well, that goes against what it says. So it's kind of like let's see here.
That's a good answer.
Well, let me just say,
I think I get what you're saying. So it's not a bad. Goats are not bad.
Goats are not bad, but
And baby goats definitely are not bad.
So let's say, for example, that someone has a lot of coins. You have a lot of coins, right? You have quarters, you have dimes, nickels, and pennies. Pennies and nickels are valuable, right? They're worth money. But guess what? It costs more to make pennies and nickels than they're worth.
Yeah.
So you could if there was a parable that said, take the dimes and quarters and set them to the right, and take the pennies and the nickels and put them to the left, and the pennies and nickels, burn them down, and we will no longer have any use for them, but the dimes and the quarters will be of use. It's not saying pennies and nickels are bad, but in the analogy, it's saying pennies and nickels cost more to make than they're worth. So you might as well stop making them and just throw them away. So in the analogy, it's like throwing away, the wicked are being thrown away. So in this sheep and goats analogy thing, sheep are considered higher quality. They're better than goats for some reason. I don't understand the difference between sheep and goats. I have to do study on that. But it's not that goats are bad, it's that sheep are better. And because they're better, they're preferred over the goats, and the goats aren't good enough as the sheep. So because of that, the goats are rejected. They are not good enough for the standard. But this is talking about animals, non-sinful. They're not sinfully, okay. They're non-sinfully not good enough to the standard of non-sinful purposes, secular purposes. But that is used as an analogy for humans not being good enough in their righteousness because they're sinful. So it's taking good but not good enough for non-sinful stuff and applying it in a parable to good but not good enough morality. And so they're guilty of sin in the parable, but the goats are not bad. So hopefully that makes
So that
sense.
would apply also with the Azazel goat in Leviticus.
Right.
I think it's in Leviticus.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for that. I've
So,
always wondered that my whole entire life.
And thank you all for doing such a good job tonight. It was a good session.
thank you all for not saying anything, Homerson.
Yahweh be with you all. And as for you, Andrew, may Baal be with you. And we'll see you next time. 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks from now. Shalom, guys. Have
Great.
a great weekend.